Welcome to Dead Genre Chronicles, a critical podcast on the diversity of JRPGs. Drawing from the origin of the genre to the present day, every month we play through a JRPG and we invite you to play along and send us your questions and thoughts on it. I'm your host, Devon. With me, I have my two co-hosts who join me in this conspicuously large pink rodent in Dying for Your Sins this Easter, Becky and LeeRoy.
Hi.
Hi.
If this previous sentence didn't clue you in, this month's game is Xenogears, a PlayStation game lauded for being a marginally deeper part of a very shallow pool of games. Before we get into the discussion proper, though, I would like to lead with this. We at DGC don't suggest playing this game. We really don't think you should, and we're going to try our best in this episode to make it so you don't need to.
We did not like this game at all. Even when we did like it, we don't like it.
Xenogears is nonsense.
It's not just nonsense. It's kind of insultingly nonsensical, in that it keeps trying to convince you that it's not nonsense, and it's just this hollow shell of stuff being on screen and with no connection to stuff that was on screen at other times. It's just murky enough that you think it's really deep and clever, and it's not. It's just murky.
Never mind the 100 references and allegories in there that don't seem to connect to anything.
That's the other thing. It's constantly signposting stuff that it does nothing with. So, where do we want to start with ways in which this game is bad?
My notes just read one giant sentence. What doesn't work about Xenogears in capital letters?
There's a lot to choose from.
I think the very worst part, it's universal, and you don't even need to talk about much of the game to get into it, is just how Xenogears has a very bad localization job. It's we're talking about the quality of Wild Arms, but in a Squaresoft game for 70 hours.
Yeah.
So
I don't think it took any of us 70 hours, but
it's not always.
It took LeeRoy 60.
It took me 60 actually. Yeah.
Okay.
Exaggeration.
Well,
it sure feels longer.
Hey, if you want to do the fighting game minigame, you're going to put in 70 hours.
Here's a good way of pointing out just how broken this game is in some ways. In that the main reason it took you significantly longer than it took me, LeeRoy, is that I got one drop from one boss that you didn't.
I didn't.
The trader card. So when I got
card.
to the money grind to prepare for the final boss, I had a really quick time of it. It took me, 45 minutes or something to get all the money I needed, whereas you presumably took rather longer over that.
It took 6 hours.
Oh.
Yeah.
The trader card locked me out of a majority of the late game drops. I literally could not get them anymore. Yep. So yeah, I was stuck just getting money the old-fashioned way, and you get not very much from enemies your level when you need a lot to get the new gear upgrades. And I'm not even talking about the secret gear upgrades, just the ones, the ones that are at your level in
just
the
base. Mundane ones.
They cost still more than I had money for. That's also because I was upgrading everyone's gear, and I was using all the party members beforehand, which it wasn't kind to my playstyle when I got to the end. And I only needed to upgrade 3, but I didn't have any money anymore.
Yeah. Also, there are 10 characters in this game.
9 characters?
9.
Is it only 9?
Yeah,
there's 9.
We had this issue when we got to that room.
We had this argument.
There's Satan and Sword Satan, if you want to count those two.
No, those are the same character. But they aren't functionally different in any way, and they don't even really have different animations. But there's 9 characters, and that's at least 3 more than the game justifies. And 2 of those need a full set of upgrades if you want to keep them upgraded.
I'd say that's 6 more characters than the game justifies, but...
Okay, yeah, a game that was a bit like Xenogears could have justified 6 characters, but it's not Xenogears.
Yeah, I feel like 4 of the characters are justified, and one of them gets sidelined by the end because she's a fucking woman. And it's that's literally not subtext, that's literally why she's out of the party. She's a woman.
Mm-hmm.
Because of fucking Niang. Holy shit.
There are too many characters in general in Xenogears. not just playable characters, but
yes, it's very, very hard to keep track of everyone. Like streaming this, I would have Devon in chat 40 hours behind me in the game, and I would get to a character that I haven't seen for 30 hours and say, "Who's that?" And Devon would say, "Oh wait, I've just met that person. It's this one." And that was the only reason I could tell what was going on. So, I guess that the basic theme of this first part of the cast is there's a lot of stuff in this game narratively that isn't needed.
Yeah, it isn't needed.
That's a good thesis.
You could make the argument that a lot of these characters, these peoples, become objects or symbols for the plot instead of being actual, complex characters. Instead, they're relegated to this person represents this, but
I mean, they don't really represent very much, though.
Well, yeah, I know. I mean, I'm going to like there's the part with the ethos where it's just a very lazy critique of Catholicism, and there's nothing. It never comes back. It doesn't even matter before and after. Well, before it matters a little bit, but after the ethos story's done, you never do anything with those people ever again, and they have no impact on the story.
Yeah, so the ethos is Catholicism, basically, and it's also an agent of the Solaris fascistic Sky Nation that are turning human beings into food. I'm summarizing a bit, but you don't need to know the stuff I'm missing out. And
yeah, imagine it took her 30 hours to say that.
Basically. Well, no, imagine it took me 10 hours to say that, and you'd already sat through Bart's chapter and Rico's chapter by that point.
Oh. Okay, imagine she started the sentence and then 20 hours later finished the second sentence, because that's roughly what went on.
The first part of the game consists of those three stories, basically Bart's, then Rico's, then Billy's, which is the ethos story. And, Bart's is a story about kind of guerrilla warfare to reclaim a lost kingdom, and Rico's story is the arena chapter from any JRPG where you become a prisoner for some reason, you have to prove yourself in combat to get out. And then Billy's story is he's a man of faith and he discovers that his religion is a lie. So they're very tropey stories, and they're just sat next to each other, and the common thread is Faye stumbles into this situation for no reason at all. Faye is the protagonist, I should probably mention that first. Faye stumbles into this situation just because it's there, and is the magical saviour in some way to transform the situation into a better situation, moves on, and nothing is learned or gained from any of this.
And then those characters who lead the chapters, they inexplicably follow Faye around to the ends of the earth for no reason.
That's particularly bad with Rico, who's got no reason to like you or tolerate you in any way. And I don't think he has more than about 2 lines of dialogue in the remainder of the game either.
Yeah, 4 total. I think he comes back when Hammer comes back, and that's the only major point.
Well, the only times all the characters are allowed to talk together is when you're planning out military strategies, which is a very... that sums up how Xenogears treats its characters. If they're not fighting in the middle of a war, they have absolutely no worth to the main characters.
Yeah, pretty much. And even then, what they do when they're not in the active party is very non-specific and usually amounts to take some other route to the goal and get captured along the way, just so that they can't achieve anything.
Basically only Faye, Ellie, and... Are we going to call him Satan or Hyuga? Does it matter?
Satan.
Let's call him Satan. He's mostly referred to as Satan.
So Faye...
Sorry.
I was just saying, only Faye, Ellie, and Satan have any agency, and they're the only ones who are ever, pushing the story forward in any way. Despite those immediate stories that revolve around those characters, once those stories resolve, they don't exist for the purposes of the narrative.
Except for Bart, who is relevant mostly throughout the story, just because he's a ruler of a land, kind of.
Well, he's supposedly a friend of Faye's, although they never hang out.
Yeah, the game tries to do 2 things with Bart that it doesn't try to do with the other superfluous characters, which it tries to bring this back to some idea of statehood and social structures, as represented through Bart, who is the worst possible representative of that because he's just completely irresponsible. And the other thing is, it tries to humanize Faye a bit by giving him a bro, and there's just no chemistry there.
Yeah.
There's no reason for Faye to really have any great loyalty to Bart at all. So when Bart calls on that loyalty, it falls very flat. So... I had another point I was going to make. It's gone. Never mind. Sorry, okay. LeeRoy.
I was just going to like the non-existence of these characters is really frustrating to me because this ties into. I'm not going to talk about the ending, but I'm just going to briefly say, like, basically, Xenogears is very humanist, right? But all Faye's supposed friends aren't his friends at all, and they don't matter to Faye. And I just feel like that's just a glaring fuck up because that's just like inherent contradiction where the only certain relationships with certain important people matter to Faye, and he's surrounded by all these people that he just manipulates unintentionally just to do things for him, and so there's no humanism there.
Yeah, fundamentally, like the overarching story wants to be a love story, or the core of it, that the only thing that actually happens is a love story. But because it wants to try in this big, as you say, humanist theme, it needed to flesh out more kinds of human relationships than romantic love, and it just doesn't. Even the vaguely father-son relationship between Satan and Faye doesn't work.
No, it doesn't work.
And nor does any of the stuff about Faye's actual father and symbolic father and various other paternal figures who kind of coalesce around him.
And then I can't help feeling at the end that, like, the height of human existence then is the relationship between Faye and Ellie. Like, it's just a man and a woman, and there's nothing else that's important, and that's all I can really get out of Xenogears, because nothing else works, and that's really backwards to the themes they were telling you, because it's not embracing humanity in the scope of it. It's only embrace the one person you love and damn everyone else is really what happens.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, you called it, we were chatting about it, and you said it's like it's a stage play with only. And the three characters you identified there were Faye and Ellie and the villain. And that's very true to me. Like, everybody else is just painted on a backdrop. Or it's like a shadow puppet or something.
Yep.
They're there to kind of fill out the boundaries of the world, but most of those boundaries aren't needed. Like, you could tell an interesting story that ends in the same place that didn't have those first three chapters in at all. And probably didn't have Ramsus or the elements or Emeralda, or
Choo Choo.
Definitely Choo Choo. We'll come to Choo Choo, or Steve Saint's pilot Maria.
Yeah.
At least with Ramses is that he's very similar to Faye. It's a foil, but he doesn't need a foil because he already has Krelian, who's also his foil. And so, how many foils does Faye need? I don't know. I think he probably has another one in the story.
Well, he's got Id and Graf as well.
Oh yeah, that's true.
His internal foils.
There is a pattern where, like, ultimately, Faye relates to all these characters who are in different ways mirrors to him.
Yeah.
Either because they're ancestors of him, or they are previous incarnations of him, or they are antagonists to him. And it's just, for a game that sprawls so much, it's incredibly solipsistic. And even, like, we're talking about Ellie as if she's a character, but she's thoroughly painted into the background really by the finale.
I think I felt a different way, actually. Even though Ellie wasn't allowed to be in the story, which is frustrating, Faye doesn't really have a personality that doesn't revolve around Ellie, so it seems as if the only reason for Faye to do anything or exist is for Ellie, so Ellie seems to take the most importance overall, despite her having no agency in the story. It's like...
I mean, I'm going to talk about that when we get onto themes, because actually, if the game is saying anything positive at all, it's saying that relationships are more important than individuals. So, in a sense, neither of those characters being anything without their relationship works.
Yeah, that makes sense too.
Also, it's pretty terrible that it can't let them do anything.
That's the... I'm not gonna be able to say solipsistic right, but solipsistic? Anyways. Solipsistic. Like, the word economy in the game is what's so frustrating, because there is a lot of text. It's not for want of, like... They talk a lot. They talk all the time in Xenogears. They're just completely ignoring everyone besides, whatever the actors in the play, the three actors. Even though Krelian doesn't get introduced until like 40 hours in, he becomes one of the most important characters anyways. And so the word economy is all just messed up to, it doesn't support, that's why it's...
Sorry, say again, you broke up.
Oh, I was just saying that's why it's one of the most frustrating games I've ever played, because there's constantly moments for Xenogears to not do this thing, and it just keeps doing it. Keeps doing it forever.
It's just so much text, and I mean that's like we talked a bit about the problems of the plot, and we could go on for hours about it, but it's worth kind of stressing that it's not just the content of the plot that's the problem. It's also the way it's delivered. And kind of through Disc 1, for all its very chunky episodicness, which for me felt a lot like Chrono Cross, and we talked about how that can work when we talked about the first half of Chrono Cross. It doesn't work in Xenogears, because Xenogears doesn't have any mood. But there's also how that's conveyed. The majority of the environments are very bland, and the choice of 3D graphics over a pre-rendered backdrop means it's very monochrome. It's very murky because the lines aren't very clear because the tech isn't there to do anti-aliasing and stuff. So it's just drab to look at a lot of the time.
But that art still comes to its own when Xenogears finally reveals that actually it's like really oppressive, really edgy. That's a pretty good word for it, though. Really exaggerated, and then it starts to make sense why this aesthetic was picked from the beginning, why it was always sunken, why it was always like just messed up. But it doesn't work because it's not that there isn't a mood in Disc 1; it's that the mood changes every 5 minutes, and so
it takes a very long time to get to any kind of point at all.
There's no consistent feeling or theme. Oh, I'm breaking up again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you go through this sequence of just text boxes. Text boxes at one location that maybe hint that you should go to another location where there'll be more text boxes. And then you get to Disc 2 and the money runs out. And like most of the story of Disc 2 is told in this screenshot of Faye or Ellie or sometimes Satan sitting in a chair with a still frame on like a big projector screen behind them, floating in space with the pendulum swinging and just text over it. And like just at the level of reading comprehension, text in the style that Xenogears uses, in the font that Xenogears uses, overlaid on a noisy background is nearly illegible. Like, it's grey text on these
grey text with a
blue backgrounds.
With a blue outline on pictures that often have flecks of blue and white in them. It's just really annoying.
There's no reason they needed to like show us who the narrator was too. Like that was actually always irrelevant, and they could have they had a screenshot in the background of the relevant CG, and they could have just put the relevant CG in the forefront instead of doing the stupid chair
with the swinging pendant of fucking Sophia.
Which they later stop using the chair so much and actually do what I say, but like they focus on the chair at first, and it does nothing.
And also, there's a sequence where They finally decide, we're just gonna go full hog and make this basically just a stage play where we show like the image of what's actually happening and just don't have an actual background that have the character sprites there to act it out for a bit. And it's like, it works a lot better than just a pure text format.
Yeah, that works better too.
But also, like, that particular stylistic device, I think it is supposed to interact with the fact that when it's showing you Faye's internal psychological stuff, the visual metaphor it uses is different versions of Faye sat watching like projector screens with his memories playing on them. And I think the chair scenes are supposed to call back to that, but they don't. They feel completely different because the text is narration rather than dialogue. And what it's describing is big world events rather than inner turmoil. And Faye's inner turmoil is not interesting. It's psychonormative and ableist, fundamentally. It's a really trite treatment of the mental health issues that it claims that Faye is going through, that it clearly hasn't researched in the slightest.
Oh yeah.
So I guess content warning for that as well. If you are affected by significant mental health stuff, this game will not treat you with respect.
Especially since it's revealed, we're not caring about spoilers, it's revealed that Faye has dissociative identity disorder, and then immediately after using this mostly accurate term for overused plot device, we kind of commended it, and then like 5 minutes later, Satan goes, "Wow, a real schizophrenic." Like, holy fuck. So close.
That was such a heel face turn for Satan too, because he's never acted like a dorky science guy who just doesn't care about other people for the sake of knowledge. Like, he's always actually been okay with he asks people first. He always respects their boundaries.
Yeah.
And until and even the plot kind of props it up because Satan is trying to bait Id, but I don't know. It was just really terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I mean, Satan's character design is the dorky scientist, very definitely. Like, he wears this great big natty robe and tiny spectacles. And the first time you meet him, he's in a lab experimenting with some sort of spider helicopter thing. But after that, he's much more the kind, compassionate mentor figure.
He's basically... Yeah, he's Faye's dad, basically.
He's in loco parentis to Faye, definitely.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the presentation of the story.
I totally blocked out all the... I forgot about all the id stuff, even though it just happened, so...
It's terrible. You can... The story does not even need for Faye to have a second personality that's violent. There's no reason for that. Like, Faye is Shinji if Shinji also occasionally turned into... I don't have the anime archetypes at my fingertips anymore. Devon, what's the anime archetype for the violent second personality?
I don't fucking remember. I don't know this. Why did you gotta put me on the spot?
I know you're the anime guy.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean I have lists of tropes in my head.
Lucky you. But, like, that's the point. There is this thing with Faye having 2 or 3 or possibly 4 personalities, and the game loses count. I lost count, and then I realised that the reason I'd lost count was because I was tracking what the game had said, and the game contradicts itself. Faye has multiple different personalities, one of which is a murderous asshole, and there is a plot turn where they all reconcile, but it's not part of the story.
Yeah, it's just like... It reminds me of fucking Persona 4, and that did it better, because they're actual, like... It matters there.
And it's it's like Faye's own hero's journey, except it's all internal. And it doesn't really... It's not relevant to the plot, that's true. But what happens is, after he reconciles with his personalities, he gains the memories that he's had for 5,000 years, and he's like super ascended Jesus because he's dealt with his trauma.
Except that even that doesn't make a blind bit of difference to him, because it doesn't change him at all. Which suggests that he didn't actually need the memories to make a difference. Somebody could just have told him the backstory.
See, that's my problem, because, like, when someone, namely fucking Ellie, when she gets turned into Miang, which is... Miang is hidden in a gene in all women. Miang will just randomly turn women into incarnations of Miang. And when that happens to Ellie, she shoots Faye, for one. But also, she gets all of her memories back. And... I forgot where I was going with this.
I just have, I have secondhand embarrassment for Takahashi when I hear these things.
Yeah, I know, it's so bad. When Ellie gets turned into Miang, she remembers all the things that have happened, and when that happens, people turn into exposition machines. They don't fucking count as characters anymore, they just turn into things that will spew out the history that the game cannot be bothered to tell you otherwise. Like...
Well, there again is the structural problem of this game, in that it's spent ages developing the modern state of the world. Like, here's Bart's country and war, and here's Rico's city, and so on. And none of that matters, because the things that matter to the plot all happened 10,000 years ago, or 4,000 years ago, or 500 years ago.
Yeah.
At those specific intervals.
Or in the case of Faye, like 30 years ago. But still, everything happened in the past. Everything happens in the game you don't play. Also, all those stories are more interesting than the game you actually play, too.
Yeah, and you just get it all delivered to you via Ellie Miang telling you what happened 10,000 years ago, or Faye telling you what happened 5,000 years or 500 years ago, and it's just like, oh, okay, why didn't you tell me this without you turning a character into a husk for you to put the narrator into? Like,
and my cynical thought on this is that either eternally Takahashi in general or Square, they didn't think the other the plot lines Takahashi had planned for the Xenoverse were good for an RPG. None of them were good except for the one that was embroiled in like all these wars. And that they picked this one specifically because he wrote out outlines for a bunch of different crap. And they picked this one specifically because this one has the most fighting in it, and so it'd be the best fit for an RPG. And it just feels the most soulless because all the other potential stories they could have told that may not even need to be RPGs seemed a lot more interesting than what Xenogears actually came to be. That's just conjecture.
Well, I mean, the story goes as Takahashi has told it himself. He and Soraya Saga came up with two basic plots, which, and he said he was really excited by these ideas, and the ideas are an ancient AI crashes in a spaceship and seeds life on a new planet, and a soldier with multiple personalities. And like one of those ideas is vaguely interesting, and the other is just the most cliche.
And they put them together.
And they put them together and mostly focused on the multiple personalities thing. Like most of the effort on writing the game goes into the multiple personalities, and most of the interesting stuff is in the other idea.
And the other idea got turned into Xenoblade X, so you don't need to play Xenogears, for one. But also vaguely reminds me of Star Ocean, which, like, the whole start of Star Ocean 1 is Tales of Fantasia, but also, like, a spaceship crashes on a planet, and there's time travel involved because, like, some nanomachine, or I guess it's probably fucking nanomachines, given how Japanese writing goes, is causing a
There was an obsession with nanomachines at that particular moment, because we're also around, like, Metal Gear Solid at this point. And Xenogears talks a lot about nanomachines, and clearly doesn't know what a nanomachine is. Because nanomachines can do everything, including be entire people. Like, there are literally characters in this game who are just clouds of nanomachines.
There's the article that said nanomachines is a metaphor for religion, but really, in Xenogears, it's a metaphor for God and all existence. Because nanomachines can do everything.
Yep.
Well, I don't even think it's a metaphor for God, because there's plenty of other metaphors for God in this game.
Well, that's...
Have you considered that they're not a metaphor? They're just kind of cool tech that Takahashi was like, wow, that's pretty cool. I'm going to put them in my game because Takahashi's a hack.
That's what everything is. That's why Maria's in this game. That's what Choo Choo is. All the game is just like, this is going to be going my game, and it went in his game.
That, I think, like... is a good point to mention, that quite apart from being this incredibly super serious attempt at a game that responds to Neon Genesis Evangelion and
probably Metal Gear
Final
Solid.
Fantasy VII and Metal Gear Solid, and the seriousness turn in Japanese culture at that particular moment, this game is also a mecha, and it keeps calling back to like 80s and early 90s mecha.
Yeah, I was about to say. It's not even post-Evangelion mecha, it's old mecha, it's pulp mecha.
Well, no, because Faye and the Weltall are clearly Shinji and...
Yeah. Well, yeah, I know that, but I mean...
But all the other mecha stuff that happens is older.
Exactly, yeah.
It's older style. And those shows are gloriously silly. Even when there's a serious point to them, they have so much fun. And I think Devon's main complaint with this game has been... Xenogears hits all those buttons, and none of them are fun in Xenogears.
They are completely joyless developments. Like when the fucking elements...
I was just thinking of that.
Yeah, they turn their mechs, which are animals, into one giant combined robot, complete with transformation sequence, and it's completely just accepted, and then it's a boss, and the fucking... team doesn't even go, wow, what a fucking weird thing to do with your robot. It's just like, yep, boss.
That was a really surreal... Sorry. What are you going to say, Becky? Mine's stupid.
That's not even the most, like, spectacular thing that happens with a silly thing that happens with a mech in this game.
I think when Billy's dad becomes a mech and then goes into a gun and then shoots himself and dies, except he doesn't really die, but then dies, is probably the silliest part. At least as far as mech things go.
That is probably the most egregiously badly written
most
section.
Indulgent. Yeah.
Like, so the plot is Billy doesn't get on with his father, and he gets into this fight in his mech with some powerful enemy that he can't beat. And halfway through, his father comes back to intercede on his behalf and save him. And what his father does, his father's mech's special power is that it turns into like a shoulder-mounted Smith & Wesson revolver. It's very clearly designed to look like a revolver, but be a shoulder cannon for a giant mech. And he turns into the mech form, and Billy shoots the mech form gun at the enemy and wins.
It shoots the pilot.
And then it is revealed that this mech form gun thing works by shooting its pilot at the target. So now the pilot, Billy's dad, is dead, and there is a moment where Billy thinks his dad is dead, and then his dad just fucking walks round the corner and is like, oh yeah, I fixed that part. It's insulting nonsense, is what it is. And that's a good example of things that Xenogears gets wrong. But specifically in terms of things Xenogears sucks all the fun out of, there are two other things. One is Choo Choo, who is the 2-foot-high cuddly mascot creature that you pick up in about the second chapter of the game. That for God knows what reason you can name, and I have to apologise to Jackson Tyler personally for the fact that I named it after them, which stuck them with it for the rest of the game. And Devon had the right idea and named it Takahashi. And you should check Devon's images on Twitter for the hilarious results of that. But anyway, you get this cuddly toy that follows you around and is for some reason in love with Faye. And halfway through the game, its limiter is removed and it turns into a giant version of itself, which is its mech, and becomes a party member because now it has a mech, and all the party members have mechs for very tenuous reasons. And it fights a boss as itself, and again, joyless. It's the McDonald's corporate mascot of cuddly toys. It's that joyless. And so that's another thing that all the joy has gone out of. Finally, somewhere in Disc 2, there is a chapter that was clearly, in Takahashi's mind, this spectacular high-budget sequence where Solaris, the bad guys at the time, unleash a massive city-killing weapon that looks like a ball of spikes
I know. I just
50
remembered
feet
this.
long. And it's not actually that uncool, a ridiculous city-killing super weapon design. But all that happens is you go, we need a super mech to beat this with. And you turn your airship into the control unit for a mech that unfolds out of the government building of one of the cities.
Yeah.
So you're now in a mech that is literally city-sized, fighting this spiked ball thing, and the fight is the least interesting fight, visually, in the entire game.
Not to mention there is zero build-up and there's zero denouement after that moment, so it just happens inexplicably, and you keep going.
Yeah. And that mech gets used again, but then it gets just fucking trashed because the plan it's used for goes wrong and they overdo it and it blows up. And you never get to see it again. Fucking rip.
To sum up Xenogears in a word, did I say this? Did I already say it was overwhelmingly mature? Because that's my tagline for Xenogears, is overwhelmingly immature.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It's.
I think Takahashi was older than me, so I got to knock on wood. But
it feels like a 17-year-old's idea of what a super deep narrative would be, and I say that because I wrote shit like this when I was 17. I still have folders full of planning notes for stories that are exactly like this. That have my thing is bigger than the other thing. The widget in this is bigger than the widgets in the stories I've already read. So instead of it being a Death Star blowing up planets, it's a super weapon that can kill stars or galaxies or something. And my guys travel further and they have more powers, and it's all about God, really. And it's got nothing to do with any kind of actual spirituality.
I also want to kind of tackle the thought that we just don't like it because it's aged poorly, which is horseshit.
I've been thinking about that. It's not it's not that the game aged poorly. It's like the exact same thing but different, where you had to have been there. If I was an impressionable teenager, I would have to set myself 13 or 14 because I don't think I would be that into it. But if I played this game when I was 13 or 14 all the way to the end and experienced that ending, it probably would have meant a lot to me. It would have been pretty important to me. But I've seen these themes done better. I've thought about these questions on my own before. I didn't get anything new out of Xenogears, and it's nonsense on top of that. So,
well, specifically to the question of whether it's aged badly, it has to be said, when it looks good, it still looks really good. Like, when there's an actual visual composition that works, it works. And some of the music's still good.
I think it's visually fantastic, honestly.
Yeah.
Particularly...
Go ahead.
Sorry, Devon.
No, go ahead.
So one of the positives I want to stress with the game is its use of the camera when the camera is scripted, when the camera is not in control of the player, is you compare it to the game, the other, particularly Squaresoft PS1 RPGs, and it's far more dynamic. It's just doing more work to create the experience.
Yeah.
Like in combat, it moves a lot, but it always moves with the action. Like it's not your kind of FF7 big camera sweeps that go on all the time. It's, it emphasizes attacks, it moves with attacks, it takes this fundamentally turn-based sequence where when you're in a menu everything stops, and there's enough movement on screen that it feels active. And in cutscenes...
Oh. Yeah, I was going to say the cutscenes.
Yeah, in the cutscenes, like, there's an attempt to create a language of the camera, and there's some awareness of cinema in there.
More notable than that...
Sometimes it's very silly. Like,
there's
sometimes it just goes way ambitious, but... Sorry.
I just think a big importance to the cutscenes, like, you're right, I could have, kept going. But there's just no formula to it, right? You don't get to the point and Faye stands there and all the party members come out. Well, also they fall behind him normally, but, there's none of that, right? Every single cutscene is, from the ground up. They think about how they're going to shoot this, what's this cutscene going to do, consistently. And the cutscenes are poorly written, but they're visually... there's cinematic language there. It's fantastic, and they're all singular, and they're trying to evoke things that the writing just never can support. But yeah, the directing is really good, despite the writing.
and despite the fact that when the player does get control of the camera, it's completely unmanageable and terrible a lot of the time. There are literally areas in this game where you cannot actually point the camera at from any angle so that you can see where you are standing.
The fucking gun room. Oh my god.
The gun room, which is the bar and rec room on your submarine, sandship, airship combination vehicle. It plays all those roles over the course of the game. It's on 2 levels, and the top level is more or less a mezzanine. And in the middle there's a lowered level which has a couple of doors. And if you are actually on the lower level, there is no angle where the camera will show you where Faye is standing. This makes finding your way to those doors, which occasionally you have to do for the plot, functionally impossible. You just have to go, well, they're in that wall, I will run in that direction and rub my face against the wall until I hit a door, just mashing the interact button.
Yeah. I think, the actual act of playing this game, aside from some balance tweaks, which is true of modern games too, is probably one of the best experiences of mechanical stuff that I've gone back to on PS1 so far. I do still have a lot to go, but it's not hard to go back to, compared to some other stuff we've done on this podcast, Wild Arms. But
yep.
But
it's bits of it feel better than Chrono Cross, actually.
Yeah.
The combat feels fluid and pacey in a way that Chrono Crosses didn't.
Yeah, Chrono Cross kind of detracted from what made this system interesting. The death blows are kind of the bread and butter, but also there's a lot of weird facets of stuff that you don't really need to pay attention to, fucking, you probably should.
Combo points.
Combo points. You can just save up, like, your fatigue and then unleash huge strings of combos to just annihilate things.
As we're getting into combat, let's just pull back and explain the concept of the death blow. So basically what happens is, a bit like in Chrono Cross, you have a certain number of action points per turn. It's simpler than in Chrono Cross because you get the full restock every turn rather than it depleting over time. Blah, blah, blah. But your turn comes up on the ATB, and you get, it starts with 3 and it can go up to 7 action points. And for normal, like most non-normal attacks are just your entire turn. But for normal attacks, what you do is it goes into effectively a menu where triangle, square, and X are different attacks that you can do. And triangle takes 1 point, square 2, and X 3. And a death blow, and you can input any sequence, and some of the sequences are death blows, which have a special added effect attack at the end, which has a more detailed animation and does more damage. And it's a little bit like a fighting game combo. There's no stick manipulation, thank God, otherwise I wouldn't have got out the first chapter.
Or a response time.
But it's like, it evokes the feel that you are doing something very well. Because you're pressing all these buttons, of course you're doing something, but you're actually not, because it doesn't make any difference.
Yeah.
Like, you're just choosing from a complicated menu.
And an easy way to add just a bit more, I don't even know about nuance, but just a bit more individuality is like every single character has the same button combination for every single combo. Even though they fight completely different from each other, you still input the same things to do the same amount of damage, and have generally the same sword animation usually. Like the X attack is kind of just like a direct attack that knocks them up always or whatever. And they could have just diversified the inputs, but they didn't. I don't know.
I mean, they all end with cross. So they had to kind of restrict themselves, and it's based on how many AP you have, which is also restricted. So they had a limited number of combinations if they wanted to follow both those rules. But yeah,
they had a ton of death blows though. That pretty like square triangle X and triangle square X. They do the same amount of damage. The only difference is the animation. They're even pretty much the same combination of buttons. So they could have been for 2 different characters instead of for the same. Every single character gets this.
And and this is something we'll come on to as well. The actual RPG progression in this game really is meaningless. It's just progression. It's just you need this at this point in the game. So if you don't have it, you grind for it.
Yeah.
And that goes not just for like death blows you unlock by grinding, but you can only they're also level gated. So you can only get them once you hit a certain level. And like all your mech upgrades, it's just, have you been to the mech shop in this town and bought the stuff? And there are interesting systems, because if you know what the main abilities of a boss coming up is, you can usually get 100% resistance to it. But then that trivializes the boss.
And at the end of
Sorry.
I was just going to say, at the end of the game, there's also more things you can do, like absurdly power up your engine, or power up someone's ether specifically, or just make yourself really defensive, or you can choose between the heals are weird the way fuel works, which I don't even feel like explaining. But
we haven't got into the mechs yet, but we'll get into that because they're terrible. But go ahead.
Those systems keep expanding. You get freedom, more interesting things to do. Although at first they don't introduce any of that till the very end when it doesn't matter anymore. But yeah, because at first all it is go to the shop, buy the newest parts, you'll be able to win for sure. And so yeah.
And that does, I guess, bring us to the mech question, i.e., why does this game have mechs in it?
Yeah.
And what do they add?
Why does it have mechs is just because they wanted to have mechs. That's obviously.
We've already mentioned the Evangelion connection there.
Yeah, well, no matter what you do with mechs, like at Square One, when you decide to have mechs in your story, it's because you want to have mechs in your story.
Yeah. But there are meaningful cybernetics questions to ask with kind of human to human shaped machine interfaces. This game doesn't ask them.
No, it doesn't.
But also the mech combat is really just stodgy compared to the the hand-to-hand stuff. Because the way the mechs fight is the mech will have roughly the combat style of the pilot. So most of the mechs are just martial artists, and they just punch each other. There's no... With the exception of Billy, there's no kind of ranged weaponry, there's no shoulder cannons, no laser beams, none of that stuff. It's all...
There is weaponry, but it's still applied to the same buttons as the people who punch. So Rico will shoot his machine guns, but it's effectively the same as Faye's kick. There seems to be no difference between a ranged weapon and a fist weapon unless it's a special attack.
Yeah, except with Billy, who has the terrible ammo mechanic that you just never have. You either never have ammo for a particular weapon, or you never run out.
Yeah.
And also
also, if you're talking about his ammo, it's still effectively the same as a punch. It takes a consumable.
Yeah, I suppose. And even then, like, one of his 3 options doesn't, because it's a magic gun rather than a physical gun. So I just used that whenever I needed to use Billy. Billy
can also shoot. So once he gets his Omni gear, which is a whole other thing, he can shoot his dad at will and just shoot his dad whenever he wants. It's kind of like Ellie's A-Rods, and so those special attacks are like different flair each mech kids, and they're usually all garbage.
Well, I mean, usually every character has like one thing that might be useful. So Faye gets his
system
attack defense.
I know. I wasn't talking. There's the ether machine, and then there's special options, and I was talking about the latter.
Well, yeah, but I'm like, those are clearly just 2 different boxes to put the same functionality.
Yeah, well, one costs fuel, one costs CP. That's why they're separated.
Yeah, so mechs are powered by fuel. Your fuel goes down as you do stuff. You can charge in battle to recover very small amounts of fuel.
Almost here at the end game, in which case you can recover all of your fuel instantly.
Well, there are fuel hacks.
If you choose to equip it, that's what I'm saying. There's actual options at the end that they don't give you at the beginning.
I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't just equip.
Well, that's because it's too strong. Like if you gave if you got one, you can buy the smaller increments in that shop, but why would you, right? But if they put that in, like earlier in the game, you could actually be like, well, I'm going to put this on instead of having armor or whatever.
They did.
I never got one.
They have I think it's a C charger, but like. They give you one that charges 30 and 50 earlier on in Disc 2.
Well, yeah, that's Disc 2.
Well, I mean, fucking...
Disc 2 is pretty late in the game.
Disc 2 is like 10 hours of game.
I literally never wanted for fuel in Disc 1. It was all Disc 2.
Well, it's because it wasn't very difficult either. If they added those options, they could have also done the gimmicky puzzle bosses faster, so you're not onslaughted with them all in Disc 2. This new style of play that you didn't even bother with.
There are a handful of gimmicky puzzle bosses which are vaguely interesting. But the other thing with the mech combat is it's just this grind, because healing's really expensive in fuel terms, and it's really hard to recover fuel. So any turn you spend healing is you're never getting back stable after that.
And
if you're already...
The most viable strategy is offense, because once you start losing, it takes a turn to do anything, and it takes a turn to heal, which takes a ton of your fuel. And it's better. You need your fuel to move faster with your boosters. So the most viable strategy is always turn on your booster and do as much damage as possible.
Pretty much.
There's supposed to be a dynamic there, because each attack you do, first of all, they have different accuracy and the cost of amounts of fuel, but the fuel amounts are so negligible, you're always going to be hitting X, which is the most damage, even though it costs 30 fuel. But besides that, each time you attack, you get a level up, and the higher your level is, the more fuel you charge. And once you have Omni Gears, and you sit on level 3, and don't use your death blows, which consumes your level, you can charge a lot more fuel once you're in infinite mode. And so there's not really dynamic here, though. Like the question is, do you want to use your death blow, or do you want to try to get your fuel back? And you're always going to use your death blow because you don't need your fuel back yet, and then you'll probably kill the boss.
Yeah, mostly. I mean, it's not you're better at games than I am, both of you, so I struggled more than either of you. Like, there were definitely places where I got walled, but...
It's really A to B, the mech thing still. It's like, did you do the right thing? If you didn't, then you lost.
Yeah, did you get all your mech upgrades? Yes.
Yeah, the worst walls I found were all like, oh, I missed the last gear shop, and there's not a gear shop in the area before this boss. shit. Which happened a couple of times.
And it's very unkind. There's no way to recoup that. There's no way to go back. You're just stuck. It's very... That doesn't happen in new RPGs. It's a really old RPG.
Yeah, I mean, it's got a lot of the old RPG vices.
And I say that, but like if you hit a point of no return in another RPG, you can usually at least level grind and get past that. But the mechs do not go off your character stats whatsoever. It doesn't matter how much you level up, really. If you didn't
except
buy
Choo-Choo.
except Choo-Choo. If you didn't buy the mech parts, you just can't fight, and that's just ridiculous.
Oh yeah, I found out
terrible.
that Choo-Choo, if you give her all the stuff she can get up to 49,500 health as
You have
a
to
mech.
use all the drives on her, right?
Yep.
I don't know why
Good
you do
grief.
that.
I mean, I didn't use a drive on anybody at any point in the game because I kept forgetting I had them.
That goes. I didn't even bother because the game doesn't.
Sold them.
It doesn't matter. I had to sell them at the end.
For your
That-
final rush.
That gets into like. There's just like there's actual sexism in the mechanics themselves because there are only 4 girl characters. One of them gets fridged, and even though she's the most important character, the other 3 they're not even human. There's a gerbil. Okay, I don't even know why I said not even human. They're not even adults. They're not women. There's a gerbil, there's a little girl, and there's a robot. And
I mean, none of them are human because Maria's a robot.
No, she's not a robot.
I'm pretty sure she's a robot.
No, she's not. 17, she's psychically linked with 17 because it's hinted that it's her mom, like in a stupid Evangelion thing. But she is.
I mean, it's
human.
actually her dad. Her dad is actually the robot.
Her dad is 18.
No, he put himself in 17 when they encountered each other. That's literally what happens, LeeRoy.
He transfers himself from 18 to 17.
He says my spirit's always going to be with you.
No, he literally transfers his memory from 18 to 17.
Okay, that might happen. But then why does... Okay, but 17 moves before that happens to his dad. That means someone is in 17. And they mention her mother died while he was working on the research of 17. Suspiciously, just like Shinji, the backstory for Evil 1. So I just assumed, the mom's in there. Which it's probably now the mom and the dad after her plotline. Her plotline's dumb.
Yes.
But anyway, what I was getting at is that so out of these 3 playable girl characters, none of them are women, and 2 of them you can't even use in the field. They literally do not do any damage in the field, despite Maria having access to her robot at all times. She can only use them for special moves. She can't use them for her death. She doesn't get death blows. And Choo-Choo can turn huge. And she even makes her limbs turn huge to attack, but they just don't do any damage. It just doesn't let Choo-Choo do. They don't let Choo-Choo do any death blows, and they don't let her do any damage. So the only girl character you can use is Emeralda, a robot, and that is it. Every other party member is like a really masculine guy, and there's no girls in the game. There's no girl characters.
It's pretty bad. What else was I going to say? So yeah, like the mech combat is lifeless and bland and doesn't even have the feel that the non-mech combat has. And like none of the combat is particularly difficult. Nothing about it is meaningful because the characters all function the same. They have one thing that they can do that others can't. Maybe if you're lucky. But I say that, but mostly it's just Ellie has air rods, which is her mech's special move, and like the way to use air rods is you also equip an ether doublet, which just doubles the power of all your magic stuff, and a power magic, which is just a big boost to your magic stat.
Oh yeah, hold on.
And
I didn't get those
before you
until the end.
Go on to this. I just want to say that the ether doubler is a ground equipment. It's not a gear equipment, but it still fucks with gear stats because this game is not properly programmed or something. You really shouldn't do that.
The pendant and the speed shoes also affect you.
Yeah,
even though they're ground equipment.
It's kind of dumb, honestly.
See also the fact that Faye has 2 buff spells, one of which is defense up, attack down, and the other is attack up, defense down. But the attack up, defense down one doesn't reduce your defense.
Also, they arbitrarily pick which skills will translate to your gear or not, and you have some pretty useful skills that you just can't use in your gear. Like Billy can cast haste, and when he's in a gear, he's not allowed to cast haste anymore for no reason.
Because basically, they need an excuse to make you use booster instead of casting haste.
Yeah, basically. But then
why
put the ability in?
Which carry over.
Yeah, I didn't get to have all speed shoes, which is sad because they're fun. But
it's a mess. Basically.
I'm still frustrated at the sexism because there's all of these allusions to man and women over and over again, but there aren't any women in the game. There's just statues of women and Margie, who's not allowed to participate.
Yeah,
there's more.
Like, just to make clear what LeeRoy's talking about with the statue stuff. Literally, the big icon of the good religion in the game is a statue of a male and female angel with one wing each, with the implication that if they want to fly, they have to be together. Which is a great symbol that they do nothing with.
It's just
there just aren't any women in the game to justify it.
Like I had just when Ellie got benched, and I remembered they let a child to continue fighting, but they wouldn't let the trained soldier continue fighting. It's just that's the kind of priority Xenogears has.
Well, they were, yeah. I mean, the plot kind of goes for that because Ellie is the love interest. Faye cares about protecting Ellie, so he wants her to not fight because he's scared for her, and he finds this excuse of so I can't even remember what his excuse is now.
His excuse is that now she's the figurehead of Nissan, and everyone's hopes are depending on her, so she can't go out.
That's
because
right. Yeah.
If she dies, humanity will collapse.
Which doesn't even make sense because it's not like the enemy are a rival nation on Earth. They literally live in a sky city. They can strike whenever they want, and they have weapons that could flatten the city.
It's transparently Faye's entire life will collapse if Ellie goes away. But
yeah, I mean, he is the only human being.
Yeah, he is the only human being,
and that's literally true as well because he's the only. So the setting is human life arrived on this planet when a spaceship carrying a superweapon that was developed on Earth crashed, and Faye is the only survivor of the crash. And
he's actually so the superweapon is powered by this being called Zohar, a random Jewish illusion. I'm not going to read into it. And Zohar is essentially God, and so Faye,
I'm going to get into that.
But I'm just going fast with it. Faye has seen the face of God, so therefore he is enabled to exist as long as this God exists. And he's basically the Messiah. He's basically the Jesus. He's literally, not basically, he's literally a Jesus character in Xenogears.
Yes, and Ellie is produced by the AI controlling the ship or something in order to oversee what happens on Earth, on the planet in response to the crash. So she also has the connection to
Faye.
Zohar.
Also Faye. The reason Ellie exists, in the lore, the reason Ellie exists is because when Faye looked at God, God has no form. So what Faye projected into God is what she became. She became Ellie because that's what Faye thought God was.
Good grief.
God.
I'd missed that detail.
That's actually, yeah.
I think when you were streaming it, we got caught up in the fact that things got real Oedipal because of how Zohar's influence on Ellie works.
It's actually
suddenly everything is a mother of something, and
right. That actually got really
7 different versions of Faye are in love with 9 different mothers that are knocking around.
But that's where it actually got really uncomfortable too, because Zohar confessed herself. It's not a human being, but Zohar confessed that when Faye looked at her, it was his imprint of desiring this being to be a mother. That's why Ellie came to be. So there's this literal Oedipus complex that just threw into the love story for absolutely no reason, that Ellie is also Faye's desire to have a mother and also his primary love interest. It's okay.
And also, he's his own grandfather or something. It got bad.
Well, the reason that they throw in the Oedipus complex stuff is because, among the other things that this game is meaninglessly fascinated with, is psychoanalysis.
Right.
And if you look on the web for writing about Xenogears, every other piece is about psychoanalysis in Xenogears, which frankly is terrible because
reading about psychoanalysis is terrible. Yeah, you got it. It's terrible. Sorry.
I mean, the oldest criticism of psychoanalysis is that you can fit any data at all into a psychoanalytic reading, because psychoanalytic readings don't actually say anything. You make up names and then you do, well, in this individual, this name applies to that bit of their psyche, and in this individual it applies to that, and so it fits everything. So the idea that you can apply a psychoanalytic reading to Xenogears, you can apply a psychoanalytic reading to anything, and only if you have a very sophisticated understanding of what psychoanalysis is it of any merit at all. And Xenogears has id and the Oedipus complex and stuff just as references, so that that's a slightly easier thing to seat on top of it.
Not to mention, you can read God and religion as basically anything as well. So, and with these two things together, Xenogears, it's not about an uber mensch. Xenogears just becomes the uber text. Like, whatever you want it to be, it can be that for you. You can look at it and it can mean anything. It can mean literally anything.
I think. Well, I mean, the reason this game has such a cult status around it really is that it's vague enough and unfocused enough that you can impute any meaning to it that you want. And I'm guilty of this as well, because I'm sitting in front of 10 pages of notes of stuff that I'm going to talk about in a minute.
I resisted. I was thinking about it. There are a lot of things I could say about at least the religion I grew up in, how we talk about the gospel being the armor of God, and God powers these actual machines that you pilot for God because of God. And so you're walking around this literal armor of God, and I'm like, wow, this is cool. And I'm just, nope. And I stopped.
That's way cooler than the religion I grew up in.
I grew up Wiccan, so...
That's also cooler than the religion I grew up in. But anyway.
I almost went for it. I could have... because the God and religion stuff is more meaningful to me because I'm still spiritual to an extent. I'm just like, wow. And I almost took the bait, but I didn't do it. That's it. That's my Xenogears story. That ultimately is our Xenogears verdict, is the bait is there, but don't take it, because it's 60 hours of your life you're not getting back on that hook. There's 5 hours of content that has substance and meaning to it, but it takes 40-50 hours to get there, and it's just like...
You found 5 hours?
I think so. Well, personally...
I want an annotated list.
I don't know.
I demand proof.
Do you think he's going to play through the entire fucking thing again just to get that? Come on.
I have 20 pages of notes. I have 20 pages of notes. I could actually give you an annotated list. However, the other part I liked was just Lacan. Lacan is one of the forms of Fae, because he's been a whole bunch of different people. And
Fae gets reincarnated. Lacan is his prior reincarnation.
Lacan becomes into status just because he's a famous painter, and because he feels he has no worth to the world at all, because all he can paint. People love his paintings, and he brushes shoulders with very important people fighting wars and stuff. And here he's just a painter, and he falls in love with Ellie again, who is at this time also the leader of the Nissan sect. She's the Holy Mother, so she's important to this religion, important to everyone's morale during this war. And all he can do is paint, and he feels this incredible imposter syndrome that it consumes his entire being, and he can't talk to Ellie honestly. He can't talk to Krellian honestly. He can't talk to even the descendant of Bart honestly. He's just kind of just like a shell of himself, because he's too hung up with not being able to accept that he likes to paint, and he deserves to paint and deserves to be recognized for that. He doesn't think he deserves any of those things. And he takes that resentment so far, he becomes Graf, and he's still relevant in the stupid plot 500 years later.
Yeah, he becomes Graf, who is Graf is an attempt to engage with one interpretation of the Nietzschean Übermensch. Basically, he goes around finding people who are going to fight incarnations of Fae and powering them up to make it more difficult. And he turns every time you face Ramses and goes, "Doth thou desire the power?" And
my fist is the divine breath. Sorry.
And I cracked on Twitter that he calls his dick the power, and I still kind of think that's on point.
Probably does.
There's a big Freudian
it's hinted Graf and Miang got together a lot of times too.
Sorry?
I said it's hinted Graf and Miang got together quite a few times too. Just saying.
I suppose it is, although when you...
It's really weird too, because he's the contact, he just doesn't want to do it. And I'm pretty sure Miang knows that, but they just hang out. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, the person you see on screen clearly in a relationship with Miang is Ramses, who is this artificially created foil to Faye. And the one good scene involving those two characters is that post-coital scene that they have. And there are two post-coital scenes in the game. There's that one, and there's the one with Faye and Ellie, where they have finally consummated their love, and then they chat a bit, and that's the point at which Faye puts Ellie in the fridge. But as far as the presentation of actual sex goes, rather than human confusions over sexuality with a vaguely Freudian overtone, but in terms of the way it actually treats, oh yeah, these characters are banging, is probably the most mature thing about it, about the entire game, because it's just, yep, some people have sex, and there's nothing special or magical or sensational about that, but we're not ashamed of it, so we're going to be able to show it, and it does create this slightly distinctive space of intimacy for them to have conversations thereafter. Even, and like in the case of the Ramses Miang scene, you find out immediately afterwards that Miang is lying and putting on a performance.
And Ramses is an insufferable child.
Well, yeah. But like, in the scene, she's playing that role, and you get a sense of sex can just be this completely ordinary part of human life, which you never get in video games.
Yeah, you never.
Never. And that actually, for the 30 seconds twice in the game, was just an incredible relief to me, because it could have been horrible. You know, I don't ever want to see an actual like Takahashi sex scene. That's a terrifying thought.
It goes on for 3 hours too long.
I think they already exist. Just it's what's his name? Fate Stay Night, Devon.
Oh no!
That's Takahashi.
Oh no!
But just to bring that thread to a conclusion, there are also in Xenosaga a couple of post-coital conversation scenes, and they're a little bit more like sensationalized or for want of a better term, male gazy, because it's PS2, there's more graphics available, but they're still mostly about, you know, humans have sex, and so what? You know, it's not the Hollywood version of sex.
Yeah, it's not like the romantic overturn, like you're saying. It's not like this is the point where these characters are now close. It's not like that. Well, it was for Faye and Ellie, but
it is. But even there, like it's the consummation of something that's been obvious for a while, and it's a peak, but it's not like a massive spike,
right.
And it's not it's never the be all and end all of their relationship. Like, it's not the symbol of their relationship.
And it's not. I think other games go for, like, at least if you, and this is really convoluted and dumb, but Final Fantasy VII, if you date Tifa, they have that scene in front of the airship where they spend that night together. And the thing about Final Fantasy VII is they refuse to tell you what actually happened, so you can ship whatever you want. You can imagine whatever you want there. And so that's that's kind of what RPGs usually do. They don't actually commit to it. They leave it all to imagination, which is pretty weak.
And that's the pattern that's the flip side of this pattern. Like, some games sensationalize it, and some games just don't show it. And like FF10 does this, where instead of having a sex scene, there's this weird impressionistic swimming thing.
The underwater date scene.
Yeah. And like FF13 with Fang and Vanille never shows them having any kind of physical relationship at all, because they're scared to commit to that. You know, I don't like the sensationalization of sex, but I'm also sick of the failure to commit to it. And I think Xenogears, for all its other faults, steers that course really well.
It's such a bizarre thing too, for how immature the other aspects are. That's, you know, the most level-headed part of it.
Yep. So, like, I don't have a segue to this, but one other positive thing that I wanted to mention about the game is that I felt that some of the dungeons quite effectively atmospheric, specifically the ones that you do outside your mechs. I felt, and kind of, two dungeons in Billy's chapter are, I'm going to get them wrong. One is the church that gets attacked, and it's Billy's church, or it's the cathedral of Billy's religion, and it gets attacked, and you arrive while the attack is in progress, and everybody's dead, and you go into this space, and you're looking for the people who've done the attacking. And there are random encounters.
I think the important aspect, just real quick about this, is that you go to the Ethos headquarters before it gets attacked, and you're allowed to walk around and see all those places before it's attacked, and then it gets recontextualized as a dungeon, and you can continue.
Yes, and it's not just the space, although the spatial design is quite good in those spaces. I think it's also there are set piece encounters, like particular rooms that you go into will have a trigger for an encounter, or particular people you talk to, or spaces you go. There'll be this encounter is here for a reason, rather than just random encounters. And what it does is it makes the spaces feel less abstract. And they are still abstract, of course. They're abstract. It's a JRPG, but they feel less abstract.
And I'm really happy for a game that's like, okay, we're going to use random encounters for this dungeon because it matters for this dungeon. But in other places, Xenogears goes, we're going to have scripted encounters here because whether it makes more sense or it's more appropriate for the tone, they will do that. And the dungeon design, it really doesn't miss any steps. It just seems kind of superfluous or whatever. It seems kind of irrelevant to the game, even though they're very well done.
Yeah, it's these little islands of good design without a context to really justify them.
Yeah.
But that was like those two levels in Billy's chapter, because it's that one, and then there's the underground bit where you find the lab that Emeralda was grown in.
Ziboima.
Yeah, that's the one. And then when you get to Solaris, there's something similar to Solaris tails off horribly because it's too long. But like Solaris is the bad guy Sky City.
Oh dang! Actually, I loved Krillion's lab because every single room you go into just has a different installation, like a huge machine, just a weird abstract screaming science, and every single room just had a new one and a different one, and they went all out. it was like excessive. Yeah. It was excessive, but it was just really, every single visual shot had something to say in that place, at least every single room.
So you at the end of Disc 1, basically, you infiltrate the Sky City to. Are you going to rescue Ellie at that point? Is that one of the times you have to rescue her?
No. Ellie comes with you. Only Ellie, Satan, and Fago, because they're the only ones who can be trusted with it.
Yeah. No, because the others go, but they get captured.
It was. They just split up. They split up arbitrarily. They went in first, and the other group went in too. And they went in first because Ellie and Satan have been there, and Faye has to go because he's Faye. But they end up getting captured as the rest of the party members. Because of course, they don't have a guide. Why'd they even go? But anyways.
Yeah, but I mean, it starts off. You infiltrate this space, and you infiltrate it through the normal method that they use to load human slaves into the Sky City. So you start off in the slave pens, and then you wriggle your way out of the slave pens, and you end up in the living area for the ordinary citizens. And it's not a stealth section, thank God. There are a few stealth section-y triggers, but it's not really a stealth section. And you do some wrangling in that space that's not really combat-oriented, it's more about hitting plot triggers. That gets you into the air ducts. The air ducts get you into Krellion's factory, where it turns into a dungeon. Not into Krellion's lab first. You go into the Soylent factory, because this game just has no subtlety whatsoever. Like, you go into... It's called, like, the Soylent project or program or something like that, which is where they recycle dead slaves into food.
I'm going to say also the Soylent Factory is completely unnecessary because Deuce itself, the biomachine weapon, ends up turning people into wells on its own for the sake of it to, like, even though that ends up not mattering too, for the sake of it recoup its own body, to form its own body, it turns humans into these mutants anyways, regardless. So there's already this factor that humans don't have this deterministic aspect, or they don't have full agency because of something more powerful than them. But they also just have Solaris do this too, because every single point in this game, I don't know, has to have this. But yeah, sorry.
The duplication. But like for all its kind of triteness, it's worth noting, like, in the late 90s, Soylent was not the meme that it is now, thanks to there being, God forbid, a tech bro product called Soylent that is replacing food, which is the worst branding ever. I'm still mad about this. But like, in the 90s, this was a reference to an obscure film from 20 years earlier. I forget when Soylent Green came out.
I don't know.
But like it is just a reference, and it's a reference that all kind of revelatory force is lost from, because like they just tell you straight out, these are people being recycled into food. It's the first thing that happens when you walk through the door.
Also, there's like you don't see that canned food ever. No one eats it on the mainland. It's just suddenly there in this place for this place only.
Well, it's canned food for Solaris.
Yeah, for Solaris.
Before you get into the factory, you're in this storeroom, and Faye and Ellie suddenly, for the first time ever in their lives, are hungry, and they see these ration cans and go, "We're going to eat some rations."
It's so weird.
And they eat the rations, and they literally step through the door and see the same things being produced on a conveyor belt. That one end is just corpses, and the other end is ration cans.
It reminds me of Austin's critique of Chrono Trigger, where in the future they make a big deal about these people are really hungry. Like when you heal, it says, "But you're still hungry." But then there's no food anywhere else in the game. You never see anyone eating. You never see any restaurants. There's no food in this narrative except for this one part where they're suddenly saying, "All right, but these people are hungry." And in Solaris, even if this is food for Solaris, when you arrive in the town of Solaris, you don't see the canned food. You don't see anyone eating. You don't see any restaurants. It's just only here in this factory where the characters happen to eat it.
Yeah. And so, like, for all its triteness, that factory environment is quite ghoulishly effective. Like, it's sinister lighting and these puddles of flesh getting boxed.
It's massive, too. It's where Xenogears just massive scale just looks intimidating, because there's not just 2 or 3 conveyor belts, but just dozens of conveyor belts with these the mutants being doled into.
It uses color a lot better than some of the other spaces as well, like because it's techie, so it doesn't have to look drab. They can have the dark shapes with kind of bright green electric lighting around them and stuff. And you move through that into Krellian's lab, which is this huge sprawling complex, which is cool, but I did feel took too long.
I think I think it didn't.
The air duct bit, and why is Joe there again?
Yeah, it didn't need 2 parts. It just really needed one under the other, not both. But Xenogears has to go big always.
Yep. So yeah, there are a few good dungeons.
My favorite dungeons were Mech ones, but I'll just not talk.
Really?
I don't need to talk over. Yeah. I'll list them really fast, but I won't go into detail. I like the underwater cave.
The underwater cave's excellent.
I like the final dungeon. Not the first part of it, though. That first part sucks. But I like the final dungeon. The stupid maze, I actually loved it. The arbitrary ridiculous maze. Just because how it's all abstract. There's nothing there. It's just impossible space, and you're just forced in there.
I think I like with that
hour,
space
basically.
Is like a lot of it. There's no encounters for.
If there's encounters, it would be insufferable and it would be worthless. But yeah, that's why it's good.
Yeah, like there are little sections that do have encounters, but it's not the full force depletion that you encounter in other mech dungeons. Because the big problem with mech dungeons is that it's so hard to recover fuel that the depletion is brutal. So every long mech dungeon has to have a point where there's a completely inexplicable shop to recharge at.
Yeah, I didn't even bother playing them naturally. I just looked up a guide because I didn't want to run out of fuel and have to start over.
Yeah, and then there's also enemy types that are like fuel bombs.
Yes.
It's just like...
It's cruel.
It just... Design your dungeons better. Pace them.
And then my third favorite, controversially, is the Tower of Babel. I actually found that fantastic. With save states.
The Tower of Babel has the worst jumping
I would not play that
game.
with... Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't play that without save states, because it's literally Dark Souls where you will mess up, and it'll force you to mess up, because it doesn't communicate anything, and it wants you to mess up and start over, and it's just like, why? You don't need to do this, but okay.
Yeah. The first 2 or 3 parts of that dungeon look great, though, and there's a fantastic bit where you go into a control room, and you're like, this control room looks weird. Oh, it's on its side. And that was cool. The
whole dedication in the mech places to make it so if you get out of your mech, you're just this really tiny sprite. Yeah. It's really cool to communicate the scale of places. That's like they had to do it, but it feels like an extra step forward visually, which Xenogears does go all the way out for visuals, always.
Yeah, on some level, the tech is pretty remarkable for them to do basically a full 3D environments game on the PS1. That has this many environments in and this much visual composition. Yeah, well played.
Textures don't repeat. It's massive. Yeah, that's probably where most of the time was spent developing, despite the story taking over that.
Well, I mean, like, the story is just Masato Kato and Tetsuya Takahashi and Soraya Saga presumably sat in a room just churning out text for some poor code schlub to type up. It's absurd the amount of text there is in this game.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to not give a shit by disc 2, and then I put disc 2 on 2x speed, and I saved about 5 or 6 hours just by raw text speed going faster. So it's a lot of text. There is a lot of text, and it does not scroll instantly. It's very slow.
Yeah, and like I say, there's a lot of text in this game, but I'm going to talk about the ending and the philosophy in a bit. I transcribed the relevant scene from the ending, and it's 2 sides of handwritten A4, so it's about 500 words.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of text. I could turn back to that. That is key. Why I'm so frustrated with the game is because with so much text, it doesn't fix any of its narrative problems. It doesn't even like a little bit. The characters are introduced with their problems, and that's it. They don't exist ever again. It's just all flat.
Yep.
But there is one good part, and I guess that's what Becky's going to go on about.
Well, there's the ending. So shall I do this, or do you want to say something about the ending first?
Nah, not really. I mean, I was just going to say I usually give the alternative readings. Like I usually think hard, give something cool to say, but I'm not going to do it. Becky's going to do it.
Yeah, I have taken the bait in a way that you haven't. So, shall I start on this and we'll see how it goes?
Yeah.
Yeah. You have it scripted. It should work. I don't know. If I will try to. I'll interrupt if like story wise they don't have the right information, I guess.
Yeah. The other thing to say is if I start using terms that you don't recognise or I go too fast and lose you, please stop me, because like it's gonna be easier to do it in flow than figure out what I was on about at the end.
All right, okay.
Let me introduce Becky bringing her work home with her to give us a little lecture on the philosophy of Xenogears.
So basically, the final 10 minutes of Xenogears, and I'm almost not kidding. It really is. It's
some aspects retroactively apply, but not enough really.
If the game justified this 10 minutes, if like the rest of the game was all relevant to this last 10 minutes, it would be a really good game and it would justify its reputation as the big philosophical game of its generation. But it doesn't. Most of the stuff that happens in the game is completely irrelevant to this.
It could also just
been. What I'm going to try to do
40 hours shorter, and it would have worked too. Honestly, so
yes,
like it could have been just really mediocre, but 4 hours shorter, and it would have earned it still. But whatever.
Pretty much. So what I'm going to try to do, I'm going to try to fill in the philosophical background, which the game doesn't provide, to explain why I think phase closing statements are important. I'm going to start with a summary of the relevant bits of the plot, which will not take long. And then I'm going to talk history of philosophy, for which my credentials, if needed, are I lecture in this stuff at a university and I have a doctorate in it, and so on. And it's going to sound, because of the way our ordinary language kind of implies or suggests intent, that I'm attributing a lot of this to this game specifically. And that's not what I'm trying to do. What I'm trying to do is say, like, this stuff exists in the background culture, and the things Faye says at the end of the game pick out things that maybe we don't think of reflexively enough very often. Obviously, there's a caveat to that, which is I'm speaking from our culture, Anglo-American culture, not Japanese culture. So I have to be a bit careful, but Takahashi has acknowledged significant Western influences on Xenogears, not just in terms of his obvious love for Nietzsche and psychoanalysis, but also 60s Western sci-fi, the Arthur Clarke, Isaac Asimov generation, which is kind of relevant as well. So what I'm going to try to do is convey the relationship between the historical philosophy in the abstract or on its own terms and the bits of our culture that are, like our modern culture, that are rooted in it. So when I say that Krelian is basically a men's rights activist, nice guy, and simultaneously expounding on the works of Plato, that might sound like a difficult claim to believe, but I'm actually not kidding. And that is kind of the overview. Krelian is expressing an individualist essentialism that can be found in Plato, can be found in the patriarchal dominant culture that we live in, and Faye's response to it is about the nuances that loses and the way in which we are able to be human and interact with one another. And the theory Faye ultimately suggests prioritizes empathy and lived experience and social responsibility of human beings. So, plot summary. We've mentioned already, this planet was seeded with life by a spaceship from presumably original Earth that was carrying a superweapon. The superweapon is powered by a thing called the Zohar, which is a reference to Judaic theology that I'm not going to explain. All you need to know about the Zohar for purposes of this is that its power source is a thing called the existence wave, a manifestation of the primal harmony of the universe. And for reasons I'm not going to go into, we kind of covered them already, Faye and Ellie both have special links to the power of the Zohar. Fast forward 9,500 years, and we get to Krelian, who loses out in a love triangle with Faye and Ellie, or with people who are basically Faye and Ellie. And Krelian, having lost this love, decides human life is doomed to pain and sadness. And he sets out to return everything in the universe to this primal harmony of the existence wave. And what he says about this, or the way he understands this is a state where all things are unified in the love of God. The problem is, because he needs to interface with the existence wave, he needs something that's got a link to the power of the Zohar, so he uses Ellie. And Faye and the rest of the party... So, towards the end of the game, Krelian captures Ellie and fuses her with this mechanism he's created, the Deus, which is going to free the existence wave and destroy everything and return everything to harmony with the existence wave. And it's not clear exactly how this works, but that's the basic idea. Faye thwarts this plan, and the Deus machine, because it is also the remnants of this ancient weapon, starts to go off. It's going to destroy the planet anyway, with Ellie still inside it. But Ellie's will within the Deus becomes active, starts to move it away from the planet. Faye chases after her to try and save her, and ends up merging with the Deus himself. So we get to this sequence where, like, Faye, Ellie, and Krelian are all somehow fused with their consciousnesses are fused with this machine, the Deus.
I would like to add, this is just is real quick and dumb, but this is part of Xenogears where they have non-sexual nudity, and it's completely relevant to whatever, the religious allegory, but also like the absolute vulnerability of Faye, Ellie, and Krelian as God. And so that's again like how Xenogears can actually incorporate nudity without being really gazy about it,
Yeah, it's quite carefully non-gazy. Although, like, so I'm just going to quickly describe the scene. You might have seen shots of this. Faye is standing naked on what appears to be the surface of a body of water, a murky body of water. Ellie is floating in a ball of light, kind of up to the top left of screen, and in the background is a giant Krelian face through most of this conversation. The sequence, I think the in-game chapter is called this, the piece of music that's playing certainly is, it's called The One Who Bears Fangs at God. And they have this, like, Krelian and Faye, like, Ellie is unconscious at this point, or at least not interacting. Krelian and Faye have this argument, and I transcribed it. It's about 500 words. They basically each speak 3 times. Krelian says something and Faye answers. And Krelian basically starts off with, well, humans suck, and we should return to this primal harmony. Faye says he's got more faith in humans than that. Krelian says, no, there's a fundamental problem. Humans will never understand one another because we have separate essences. We can only we can never cross the boundaries between individuals. We tell ourselves that we can, but it's a lie. It's a falsehood. And Faye says, well, that doesn't justify killing everyone. You can't make this decision for everyone in the world, on behalf of everyone in the world. What about free will? Krelian says, free will is an illusion, and human will is innately selfish. His position is basically that individualism is a zero-sum game. He says for one to gain, someone else must lose. Faye responds, well, okay, we're not perfect. Yes, we're selfish and whatever, but our imperfections force us to work together. And when we share labour, when we share our best interests, when we interact with each other in love, we become one. We don't need this big grand spiritual reunification because we were never truly as separate as you suggest. And that's basically, ultimately that convinces Krelian. Krelian says, prove it. There's a spurious boss fight that's very easy, and then there's the end of the game where Krelian goes, okay, you've proved it by beating this boss that was actually trivial. There's a little bit of further dialogue which we'll get into, and the game ends with Faye's opinion, Faye's view basically vindicated. So the big thematic backdrop that I'm going to pick up on is essentialism, the main philosophical school of thought that is under examination here. And essentialism it's as old as philosophy, probably older, but the classical form of essentialism is Plato's theory of the forms. You may know the theory of the forms, or the allegory of the cave. If you've heard the rather trite aphorism that all of Western philosophy is footnotes to Plato, this is what they mean. Essentialism is the philosophical account that things are defined by their essences, and true knowledge is only of the essences of things, and there is an essence of goodness which is the thing to which we should all aspire. The essence of a thing is the property or set of properties that makes it what it is. And it is, so we talk about maybe the essence of a table would be whatever defines a table. 4 legs, a top, supports weight, say. And essentialists will try to give you accounts of the essence of a table or an apple or whatever, but it's fundamentally all about human exceptionalism. It's always about saying what it is that makes us human and other things not human. There are 2 broad traditions. There's a secular one, which says roughly that the essence of humans is the capacity for reason, where reason is the ability to know the essences of things. That's Plato's view. Or there's a religious version which says your essence is your soul or your capacity for salvation. And within particularly the Christian tradition, these two are very closely linked because the early church fathers, when they were developing Christian theology and kind of pulling together the various accounts of the life of Jesus that we now call the Gospels, in order to come up with a theory that tied all of this together, they basically drew on Plato, because that was the dominant philosophical system that had survived at the time. And essentialism is bad, generally speaking. I want to talk about 2 key consequences, one of which is the more obvious problem, and the other is more what this game deals with. But the first of those is the idea that being different from the essence of something, or having less of the essence of something, is a defect relative to it. This idea, I think, is clearest in ableism or disability discrimination, where ableists say some people are fully human in that they conform to the essence of humanity, and some people are defective relative to that, and that is what disability is, and those people, because they are not fully human, should not be treated as fully human. Obviously, huge legacy of eugenics and horrible treatment of disabled people in that. You can also see this at work in every other form of discrimination, I think, where some privileged group of people are enacting the view that they are closer to the essence of humanity or the essence of goodness than lesser beings. You will find that view at work in all discrimination, which is not to say you won't find alternatives at work as well, but you will find that at work in all discrimination. The other key consequence of essentialism is the idea that essences must be individual, particularly when it comes to the essence of particular people. your essence is supposed to be what it is that makes you what you are. So it can only change if you change. So no relation of you to another person can be part of your essence, because the relationship will change if they change. So it can't be essential to you. So relationships aren't essential to the essentialist. And that, to bring it back to Xenogears for a moment, backs up Krelian's intention to remove himself from humanity, to separate himself from humanity, and to try to exist in abstraction from community. And there I'm drawing quite deliberately on abstraction because of LeeRoy's definition of abstraction as simplification. What Krelian is trying to do is divest himself of the complexity and the nuance of human interaction. Specifically, like the fact that he's lost out in love, that Ellie doesn't love him the way he wants her to. That always hold in the background here that Krelian fundamentally is just sad that he didn't get the girl. And when Faye says that love and empathic understanding are possible between human beings, he's opposing this idea of Krelian's that essences must be separate. It's got to be said, romance is a very crude way of treating this. We kind of covered this already, but saying that the true form of human connection is only romance is a very harmful stereotype. But when Krelian and Faye finishes up saying of himself and Ellie that they are one, that they are unified, in this sense that their essences overlap, that their relationship to each other is essential to them, and that what that means is that literally the boundary between them as individuals blurs. And Faye advocates this as a general model for all human beings. He says this is the solution to the problem that Krelian sees. This is why the problem that Krelian is responding to isn't actually a problem. Is because actually we aren't separate. There aren't these hard barriers between us all. So Faye's critique has its roots, or its most easily traceable root, in the work of Leibniz, the 17th, 18th century philosopher. Leibniz is the first major Western philosopher I know of to articulate a theory of relations that allows you to have a relation as part of your essence. For you to be essentially related to other people, and for the boundary between you and others to blur. And that brings us to the existence wave. So, like I say, the power unit, the power source for everything that happens in Xenogears, literally everything in the world, is the Zohar, which contains this captured... It's not clear whether it's a piece of the existence wave or the whole thing. I think what is going on with the existence wave, the reason that Takahashi called it that, is a reference to quantum physics, which says, or the standard interpretation of quantum physics says, everything exists as waves of probability until observed. This is Schrodinger's cat being both alive and dead at the same time while it's in the box, and then the moment you observe the state of the cat, that superposition, as it is called, collapses into a single concrete state of it being alive or dead. And I think what Takahashi is trying to say there is there was this primal state of the universe before anybody observed anything, and it collapsed into a discrete state where everything was in harmony. That's a very tendentious spiritualist reading of the physics, perhaps. I don't want to dunk on spiritualism because I'm going to be advocating a fairly spiritualist position, but I think the particular attachment of a spiritual meaning to that bit of physics is a little bit spurious. There is a more philosophical notion of primal harmony, though, that I think is at work here in a significant way, which relates to, again, it comes from Leibniz originally. It's Leibniz moderated through Kant and Hegel. So there is your obligatory Hegel reference in a philosophy lecture. The idea of this tradition is that where we perceive categories and divisions among things, those are features of our cognition, of our thought. So it's not that objects are divided into these categories, that they have essential properties that mean the object A belongs in box Y and object B B belongs in box Z or whatever. It's a classification that we perform. So, for example, we can ask, why is it that we think my love of JRPGs and my love of pizza are more closely connected than my love of pizza and your love of pizza? We attribute that second pair to two different individuals, but on what grounds? What is it that makes those two states belong to different individuals, whereas the first pair of states belong to the same individual, me? The point of this is that we don't actually differentiate individual objects in a systematic way. Maybe very simple objects, perhaps atoms or basic subatomic particles, perhaps bricks. Maybe we differentiate one brick from another brick in a systemic way. And this can sound like it's trivial, it can sound like sophistry, but actually it's an important strike against essentialism. Because if essentialism were true, if essentialism was a correct theory, we would be able to differentiate essences precisely. We would be able to do this. And in 2.5 millennia of essentialism, since Plato developed the theory of the forms, no essentialist has ever clearly and indisputably expressed the essence of anything. In that sense, essentialism is a failure, and it's a failure for this reason, that objects aren't equipped to have essences in the right way. So there are a bunch of metaphysical theories that take this anti-essentialist position. The Hegelian interpretation of it is called absolute idealism. The more modern English language thing is called nominalism. The one that we're going to be really interested in here is existentialism. And that brings us, finally, to Nietzsche. There's a lot of hype about this game having Nietzschean themes or engaging with the topic of Nietzsche. It doesn't very much. There are hints of it. There are terms, and clearly Takahashi has an interest in Nietzsche because Xenosaga is named after 3 Nietzsche books. And I think Xenosaga actually gets into the Nietzsche in a slightly more thorough way, not necessarily in a more focused or coherent way, or a more meaningful way. But I'm going to start with doing some air clearing, because Nietzsche is much misunderstood. Sometimes deliberately, and sometimes he's complicit in that, but much misunderstood. If you know Nietzsche for anything, you know him for God is Dead. And we have to be clear about what he actually meant by that, because talking about God being dead in a JRPG podcast calls up some immediate associations which have nothing to do with what Nietzsche was on about. We've said before that actually the cliche that JRPGs are about killing God is a bit misplaced. There aren't that many examples. But even if that is a thing that happens in all JRPGs, it's not the Nietzschean sense of it. When JRPGs do killing God, what they mean is human power, whether that's physical or magical or miraculous power, overcoming divine power. Yeah, there's a big, powerful man or monster in the sky, and the good guys kill it. That's not what Nietzsche's on about. The other misunderstanding that Nietzsche often encounters, Nietzsche's a mid-19th century writer, mid to late 19th century, so he's contemporary with the Enlightenment, and there is this idea that the Enlightenment was the overturning of religious authority in favour of secular authority. We swapped God for science, and now we know more stuff because we have science instead of God, and that's progress and modernist and great and so on. That's also not what Nietzsche's on about. Nietzsche's God could just as easily describe the science or the scientific theory of Enlightenment science as it can the pre-Enlightenment religious idea of God. What Nietzsche is referring to when he talks about God is any essentialist hierarchy. And when he says God is dead, what he's pointing to is a slow dawning realization. And the fact that it took any philosopher as long as it took to get to Nietzsche for anybody to spot this shows you how heavily invested in the privilege conferred by essentialism most of philosophy was and still is. The point, though, is all these systems whether they're religious or secular rationalism, secular humanism, they have at their core an essentialism. And this is best understood through a discussion of free will and moral responsibility. The actual example I'm going to use isn't from Nietzsche, it's from Kierkegaard, which, if you've seen that written down, you'll have read it as Kierkegaard, but I'm reliably informed it's Kierkegaard. I'm going to start, though, quickly with a summary of Krelian and Faye's positions, specifically on free will. Faye says Krelian can't impose his own will on others. He isn't entitled to say, we must return to primal harmony, I'm going to do that without consulting people. Krelian responds to this by mocking the idea that humans have free will, and he denies that it's his own free will, that it's his decision at all to enact his plan. He says that he's just doing the will of the waves, the will of God. And this is also largely the root of his claim that he's left humanity behind. What he's saying is he's divested himself, he's gotten rid of a subjective or a personal will in favour of the absolute objective will or authority of God. So that's the landscape that we're dealing with. The problem for that is, like I say, it's a Kierkegaardian example, and it relates to the story of the Binding of Isaac, not the video game. I haven't played the video game. I have no idea whether the video game Binding of Isaac has very much to do with the biblical Binding of Isaac.
It doesn't.
Of course.
Nope.
A little bit of history. Kierkegaard is regarded as the first existentialist. He precedes Nietzsche by about 40 years. The book of his that's in question is Fear and Trembling, which was published the year before Nietzsche was born. And the story of the Binding of Isaac is in Genesis 22 in the Bible. Basically, God commands Abraham to sacrifice his only son, Isaac. And in the Bible, the story is Abraham makes all the preparations for the sacrifice and binds Isaac to the altar and is about to kill him when an angel comes and says, okay, stop, you have proved your devotion, here is a ram for you to sacrifice instead. And the idea in the Bible is this is a test of Abraham's faith. Is he willing to give up this much for God? Kierkegaard has a problem with this idea. We assume that infanticide is an abhorrent act. It's wrong for a father to kill his son is wrong. So if it is God commanding Abraham, then Abraham has to make a couple of judgments before he can accept the instruction. He's got to assume that this is a message that's intended for him. He's got to assume that when God says, Abraham, kill your son, the Abraham in question is him. He's also got to be prepared to say, yes, this is God, and this is God in the sense that I am willing to trust God's morality to supersede mine, or to supersede what I already thought was the morality. Because this is, after Moses, I think. The Ten Commandments exist at this point. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I don't know. I don't know. I can't date the Bible, unfortunately.
Sorry, I might be getting that wrong. I apologise if I am. But the question is, on whose authority does it become okay, in this instance, to do murder? And Kierkegaard's point is that decision to attribute authority to God requires Abraham to first grant himself the authority to attribute authority to people. So the moral authority that's at stake is never actually God's at all. It's always Abraham's. The command from God to kill your son is only a command from God at all because Abraham accepts it as such. He could have gone, no, you're a demon trying to tempt me into doing this abhorrent act, or trying to trick me into doing this abhorrent act. So in Xenogears, Krelian's attribution of responsibility to the waves or to God is disingenuous. He says, it's not my will at all. I didn't decide this. God did. And the response is, well, you decided that the waves are God. You decided that they get the final say. And like, in the end, once you've fought the final boss and it's in the denouement, Krelian acknowledges this point. Like, Faye has persuaded him. But Krelian still rejects redemption. He says, only God could forgive me for what I've done. And this is true in a sense. You know, it's true in the sense that only if it were possible to pass responsibility to God, in the way that Krelian was originally trying to do, could Krelian be absolved. But in a way it also misses the point, because the reason that God is impossible is because their authority to forgive could ultimately only come from Krelian himself. So it's Krelian's inability to forgive himself, or inability to face the attempt to forgive himself, that prevents him seeking absolution. And that brings us to the final wrap-up. So Krelian's gone now, and Faye is finally talking to Ellie, who is back. And Ellie says that she has been... You know, her ethics were built on the idea of self-sacrifice. And she says, you know, I thought if I could give of myself to save others, that would be right. But I realise that's too simplistic now. And she spent a large chunk of Disc 2 in various ways being self-sacrificing.
And thousands of years.
And for thousands of years being reincarnated and self-sacrificing. And particularly at the end of the game, she, as merged with the Deus, is willing to sacrifice her life to move this thing away from the planet where it won't destroy everything. And Faye says, well, Ellie is half right. Faye says, there are circumstances where self-sacrifice is okay and appropriate, but it's only in harmony with the self-sacrifice of others. It's only if the people you are sacrificing for are also sacrificing to you. This is a model of responsibility that, instead of being about the absolute authority of God or reason or some other essentialist construct, it's about relationships again. It's about answerability to others. It's about existing in tension with others. It's the recognition of the fact that we are not strictly, purely separate individuals. I'm writing a paper on this at the moment. I call this model of responsibility constructivist. Krelian misses this because his essentialism commits him to this individualism, commits him to the idea that people have individual essences that are separate. And he sees the blurred areas, the relationships, as just a result of imperfect knowledge or a lack of clarity, which remains to this day a big and a problematic assumption of our thought. And it's why, if you do play the game, and God forbid, don't watch, if you really want to see this, watch it in my stream archive on YouTube or something. What Faye actually says, can I find it quickly? He says, Ellie placed the future, tomorrow, in our hands, based on our choice, and she is working to keep Deus far from our planet. She is also trying to heal your heart, you who wants to journey all alone to be with God. Can't you understand Ellie's feelings? I understand. I know her feelings, as if they were my own. Yes, she and I are one. We don't need God's help. All of which sounds like typical melodrama or banal platitude. But it's actually, if you take it as a statement of this theory, it's not. It just sounds that way because we come at this from the assumption of Krelian's position. We come at this from the assumption that where we can't see clearly, it's not because things are intrinsically unclear. It's because our knowledge or our understanding is limited. You know, those things aren't good things that exist in their own right, on their own terms. It's tend to assume that it's just some flaw in us that we can't grasp that, when in fact the very concept of trying to grasp it is misplaced. And that's, you know, I've kind of talked about the history of that with Plato and the rationalist tradition as it is in philosophy, conveyed partly through Christian theology, partly through kind of Descartes and people like that. And it still exists today. The dominant English language philosophical trends are all essentialist. But it also creeps into popular culture. Or, I suppose, bubbles up under popular culture, would be better to say. So I'm going to pick out two examples of that, two particularly pernicious examples of that, which are the so-called men's rights activism and internet atheism. I think are particularly relevant to Krelian, as he's both of those things. His whole motivation is basically, I lost out in love. And his plan is to fuse Ellie with the Deus so that he and she can be one in God in this perfect harmonious world. Because he believes that if he does the objectively right thing, or what he believes to be the objectively right thing, like that will earn her love. It's this transactional and very theoretical model of love as a essentialist property that has a defined logic to it. And if he can just do enough, he will earn love. And that's a core form of how contemporary essentialism gets into toxic masculinity. The other thing, the internet atheism, the internet atheism that we experience these days is the modern form of the secular humanism that Nietzsche was objecting to alongside old-style Christianity. And you can boil it down basically as the belief that the myth of God is unnecessary. We don't need a myth of God to explain anything, but there are still objective essentialist values. And net atheists, for all they clamour about, well, God doesn't exist, that whole ideology has very little to do with the fact of God's existence. Because actually, you can't either prove or disprove the existence of God. No logical argument has ever achieved that. What internet atheism is about, fundamentally, is asserting the essential value of internet atheists as people who know more or see more clearly than those who don't. It's all about Krellian's belief that humans and people who value human experience and human life are ignorant and short-sighted, blinded by their failure to recognise these grey areas between people as a flaw. And it's Krellian's belief too that he transcends humanity, that he's better than humans. And he should decide for humans, because humans shouldn't make their own decisions because they're misguided. Whereas Faye is saying, no, actually, we're the ones who are seeing clearly, and your demand for clarity is unreasonable and ideological and blinkering you to how people actually work. So, I guess to wrap it up, the critical point is that the idea of essentialist objectivity, the idea that there are values, true natures of things, that sort of thing, which is a myth, it exists to mitigate or to minimise the responsibility of the powerful, like Krellian, for their own power. All of this is Krellian's failure to accept responsibility for what he does, his desire to indulge himself while striking a pose of authority or righteousness or true knowledge, something like that. And Faye's response is, no, you cannot, as an individual, have this authority. The kind of endorsement or permission that you seek for self-indulgence can only exist in tension with others, and only with it in respect for and harmony with others, that already exists and is already powerful if you go into it without the essentialist preconception. And that's it.
That was good. That was fantastic.
That was good. Yeah.
Sorry, my throat is now very dry.
It was very thorough, but it was clear, and you got all the background, and it came to a point, and very relevant.
It was more enlightening than the entirety of the game we just played for this game fucking podcast.
Well, we said at the outset that our aim was to extract everything of value from this thing so that nobody needs to play it.
Yeah.
And okay, I've just talked for 20 minutes of things I think are really important that I use this game as a jumping off point for. There are better jumping off points. Yeah. It is hard to imagine a worse jumping off point that is actually a jumping off point at all than the first 55 hours of this game. Literally only the last 10 minutes matter. And the attract mode cutscene.
Oh yeah.
Like, how many times now have we come to a point where we've had to say, like, you need to watch the attract mode and the end of the game, and maybe nothing in between?
I think
like
the attract cutscene in Xenogears at least plays when you hit a new game, at least.
Yeah. And like, it's a pretty cool sequence in its own way. It's a nice kind of bridging gap between like a Macross type mecha and a Evangelion type mecha. It's just nothing. Sorry.
is completely irrelevant to the tone and everything else the game does.
Yeah. Like, it's 40 hours after that point that anything references it again. And you don't actually get to go to the wrecked spaceship. That was something I was really disappointed by, is that the budget didn't stretch to actually letting you explore that spaceship.
No Eldridge.
Yeah.
It's the Eldridge, because it's Eldritch, but localized poorly.
Yeah, we haven't stressed enough how bad the localization is of this game. The localization is execrable.
And I started going on in my head and in my notes about spiritualism in general and the value of that, the non-value of that. But again, I'm just going to say that Xenogears is the uber text, and you will get something of value from it, but it's really something you already came up with by yourself. You don't really need to play Xenogears to come up with it.
It's raw potential. It says nothing, so you can put whatever you want in it and have a game that says what you want it to say.
It's a mirror, which is why there are so many reflections of Faye in it. There you go. I have just, in a sentence, generated a whole new meaning for that game that you could now go and play, and you could give me a hugely well realised driving off the map style read where that was the meaning of the game, and I literally just came up with it off the top of my head.
And I really do appreciate. I appreciate meditative games. I appreciate that, but those kind of games I appreciate. They're 10 minutes to an hour. You go in, you get to think, and you're out. Like Xenogears doesn't deserve all of that time for you.
It's not even meditative because
it's not.
Give you a chance to stop and think. It's
you could sit down with a blank page.
Full of shit.
Sit down with a blank page, and you get more out of your own self than Xenogears is going to draw out of you.
Also, can we talk about the budget ran out, which is good, because I would hate to live in the universe where this game was 4 fucking discs long, because the second disc is where, like, Takahashi and everyone was like, oh, shit, we can't fill this out anymore, we just gotta get to the story. Okay.
Yeah.
And then it's paced a lot better, because you don't have... Like, imagine if this game was 4 fucking 40-hour discs.
I think I'd end up
pretty incredible.
I think I'd end up getting Stockholm and actually liking the game.
Oh god! I mean, the thing is, stuff that is referenced on disc 2 would have been really cool. I mean, my personal one is I wish we'd got to explore a spaceship because I kind of like Space Hulk stories, provided they're not too scary. And that would have been a non-scary Space Hulk story. And like, give me somebody needs to make a JRPG where you just go into a Space Hulk or some equivalent equivalent environment, and it's just you tracking around this ship.
I was going to say Live a Live.
No, I mean, like, the whole game.
Yeah, I know.
Like, Etrian Odyssey style, but a spaceship.
I think Shin Megami Tensei Strange Journey actually
Strange Journey is, part of it is, like, the whole thing of Strange Journey is like, oh, in Antarctica, there's this, like, parallel dimension that opened up called the Schwarzwelt, the Black World, and you go in and you're
it's similar. It's close.
Yeah, but, like, there's a bunch of techie stuff in there because you're a high-tech, soldier man. So.
That's a tangent.
Yeah, whatever. This game doesn't deserve more attention.
I might play that. I mean, we've been going for 2 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're basically done. I mean, we have to be done. I could keep talking about the game, but
no, I'm not letting you.
we could spend 100 hours listing everything that's in the game, but it wouldn't add any value. That's literally all we could do now. We have talked about everything that isn't just listing shit that's in this game and bitching about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a spiel about game design, but it's like, it doesn't matter. Xenogears doesn't matter.
Xenogears, oh man.
Well, I kind of want to hear the spiel about game design. How do you get anything game design out of this?
I'm not going to do it. I'm just not going to do it.
Well, okay, I think that's a sign we need to tune out and sign off. So, thanks for joining us for this episode of DGC. Next month's game is Kingdom Hearts 2, the sequel to Kingdom Hearts, which we played for episode 3. Or it would be a sequel if Chain of Memories wasn't stuck there in the middle and quite important, but hey, whatever. Kingdom Hearts 2 is available on the Kingdom Hearts 2.5 HD Remix Collection, which has it and the PSP prequel Birth by Sleep for $20 or so on Amazon. The month after that will be Final Fantasy Tactics. This Tactics RPG spin-off of Final Fantasy is on PS1 and remade for PSP. And both versions are on the North American PlayStation Network for $10, and War of the Lions is apparently also on the European PlayStation Network for roughly the same in local currency, pounds or, I don't know, euros. I don't fucking know outside the US currencies.
Pounds or euros, basically.
So we're playing two more. We're playing 2 more Squaresoft
Yes,
games.
I'm sorry. I'm very sorry, but
Deliver me wave existence.
More
sorry,
like I'm waving goodbye.
Damn it! You got there first. I was going to do something about how you can't just wave it away. But...
Okay, find our work on our website, jrpgsaredead.fyi, or on Twitter, @jrpgsaredead, or individually, we are @Invisifool, @EatThePen, and @WasNotWhyNot. You can also support us on Patreon at patreon.com/deadgenre. Catch us next time for episode 9 of Dead Genre Chronicles, A Heartless Kid Trusts Nobody.